And we, if I am not mistaken, this picture of Cuba help us to understand why the United States and Cuba cannot talk to each other. Do you remember that scene in Taxi Driver when Robert De Niro is in front of the mirror and he's telling, talking to me? Are you talking to me? Anytime they sit down to talk to each other, the both parts react in that way. Talking to me? Are you really talking to me? And this is 50 years now. Ana Menendez was born in Los Angeles. She's the daughter of Cuban exiles, so she's innocent. She is the author of 2 books of fiction. Her third novel, The Last Word, will be published next year. She is a prize-winning columnist for the Miami Herald, and in the fall of this year, she will be teaching at the American University in Cairo. This book, Loving Che, is a very good novel about longing, about love, and about Cuba. And I am sure that when you have read this book, you will want to change the title and put it Loving Anna. Okay, Anna, what do you have to tell me today about the internal drama of Cuba?
I don't know if I can follow that one today. Thank you for the lovely introduction. And thank you all for being here, and to Waltic for this fantastic invitation. We've all had a wonderful time in Stockholm. It's a pleasure to be here. I had the pleasure this morning of listening to Nawal al-Saadawi speak, and I don't know how many of you were able to attend, but I mention her, even though this is a talk on Cuba, I mention her because in the scope of a conference of this size, I think she reminds us that literature, art, are meant to, or at best, transcend politics. And she made a very good point of using precise language. And more than that, even though she is political, I mean, as Pericles, the often quote from Pericles says, just because you don't take an interest in politics doesn't mean it's not going to take an interest in you. She embodies that very much, and of course politics has taken a tremendous interest in her. And even so, even though her writings are political, she is not a politician, and she does not use the language of politicians. And I make this sort of somewhat lengthy, circuitous introduction to try to illustrate where my views on Cuba come from. They, of course, come from politics and from the politics that I grew up with. But my adult views are informed by my feelings about art and why we create and why we communicate. And that is the basis for me on why I am in favor of engagement. If you are a writer, you'd have to go through a bunch of intellectual hoops to argue that it is better to not communicate. And that is the principal reason why I am in favor of engagement and openness and dialogue. I think as a writer also, there's a lot of curiosity. I mean, I think the politician uses language to manipulate and to obfuscate, uses language as a veil. And the artist at best, again, because there are lots of artists who are in the service of one idea or the other. But the best art, I think, it transcends the ideological, even if it traffics in it now and then. It transcends it, and it must transcend it, because art is a way of transforming experience. And I think whereas political language seeks to manipulate and narrow, true art and true literature seeks to expand and to encompass the whole, and to try to understand in a way that goes beyond the dualities of politics. And again, all of this is a a way of explaining how I've come to my own views about Cuba, which are fairly subtle and not a politician's, and I won't pretend to be one, and I won't, there are many reasons why the embargo should go, and many reasons why it should stay, and politicians can make those arguments far better than I can. But one of the things that I do want to talk about is, and one of the things that as a writer, I think, those of us who write, want to understand more than we want to explain, and more than we want to change opinion. And I've been very curious about why so many exiles in the States profess to support the embargo. And again, it's a very complicated issue because even while they will profess to support the embargo and profess to support the new travel ban, they will travel to Cuba on the side and they will send money. And the last time that I looked into the figures, the remittances to Cuba from relatives had almost made up for, or had made up for, I don't know, perhaps Rafael knows better than I, for what was missing in Soviet subsidies. So when we talk about things like the image of Cubans outside of Cuba, which Rafael just gave us, it's very amusing, and you find that in a lot of colonial writing where the locals are very cute, sort of subhuman types. I think that there's a change also that happens in that local population. There is a sense of inferiority in that population. And I think that one of the main, there are many factors why Cubans in the States, some of it unearned, and I'll get to that in a moment, but why they are so rabidly for this failed embargo. And even though Holmes Burton is not really the main title that is supposed to enforce it, is not in effect. It's been, it was nullified by every president, including Bush. So, but even so, in principle, they support it. And one of the reasons, out of many, one of the reasons is that there is this colonial mentality still in the Cubans who have left, where America's going to solve the problem. We've got this problem, and we want the gringos to solve it for us. And a lot of that support comes from that. At the same time, I think that the Cubans in Miami have gone through various stages of evolution. And in the 70s, it was a very bad time with terrorism. Many of those terrorists, I mean, we have Posada Carriles, but there are many more who have not been brought to justice. And that is a sad and dark part of our history in Miami, unfortunately. And a lot of that intolerance continues to this day. It is not of the same virulence by any means. And I write a column for the Herald. I was writing for the last 3 years, and I mean, I'm not a dissident writer by even the most generous definition. But I criticize. I think it's important to engage in auto-criticism. I think if we want people to be protected in societies that do not have freedom of expression, then we have to make the effort to criticize ourselves as well. And I have not been bombed. Maybe I shouldn't brag about it. But I have not been attacked in any significant way that I am afraid for myself. My life has not been threatened by Renee's. The worst that I've gotten is suggestions that I be taken behind the woodshed and slapped around a little bit. So I think that the same way that Americans have an image of Cuba that is romanticized, and that was romanticized throughout history, the world has a little bit skewed image of the exiles in Miami, because in fact you find a wide variety of opinion. Some of it which is not as boldly as expressed as it should be, but you do find it. But I think that what's more interesting for me aside from the politics and aside from the repression and intellectual repression that happens in